Alrighty, hi everyone. I'd like to introduce you to an individual who is one of the leading experts in the topic of self-awareness, specifically its cognitive underlying mechanisms with an emphasis on inner speech. Dr. Alain Morin currently teaches at Mount Royal University. Courses include theories of personality, social cognition, and the self. Dr. Morin publishes scientific papers in journals such as Consciousness and Cognition, Cortex, Brain and Behavioral Sciences, Brain Research Bulletin, Journal of Consciousness Studies, Journal of Mind and Behavior, and Science and Consciousness Review. Additionally, published a book chapter called Theory of Mind, Self-Awareness and Inner Speech in Typical and ASD Individuals, a critical review with Amy Alsaid, did I say that right?
Yeah.
And Famera Racy.
Yeah.
So welcome. And thank you so much for jumping on board. I really appreciate your time.
It's my pleasure. All of this makes me look like important, but believe me, I'm not.
You are very important.
Well, I mean, like, you know. All right.
We're going to just jump right in. So
okay.
I would love to understand what inner speech is exactly, from its function to what it is not, and then what has your research basically led toward the topics of?
So maybe I could start by telling you why I got interested in inner speech. Mm-hmm. When I was growing up, I would go and take long walks, and I would be talking to myself about, you know, what are my plans, how do I feel, why is it that this happened, what will happen in the future. So in more technical terms, I was engaging in self-reflection. I was mental time traveling in the past, the future, and so forth. And I was doing all of this with this internal and sometimes external conversation with myself, because when I would go into the woods all alone, I would actually be doing the talking out loud, which made it easier for me to like communicate with myself. So right from like a long time ago, I had this hunch that this verbal conversation that we have with ourselves is very important. And so I started to study it when I was an undergrad student. Then my master's thesis dealt with it too. Then my PhD. And basically that has been the center of my work from the very beginning, based on like a personal experience, which has been proven to be shared with many other individuals. So when you think that you talk to yourself out loud and you're crazy, you're not. Actually, I would argue that those who don't are those who are likely to become crazy one day down the road. So inner speech is verbal, self-directed speech. Which may be external or internal. Another term we use is self-talk. Self-talk includes both inner speech and outer speech. And it serves many important functions. As a matter of fact, if you have a stroke in the left hemisphere, in the Broca's area, which is responsible for outer and inner speech, if you lose your inner speech, you are going to suffer all sorts of cognitive deficits, like planning is going to be difficult. Self-reflection, I was talking about just a minute ago. Switching tasks, memory, list is very long. It's actually hard to think of some higher cognitive functions that do not rely on inner speech. And so, but what inner speech is not, is like sensations. You may talk to yourself about your sensations, like I'm hungry. Right. That's inner speech. But the sensation itself is not. You may have mental images, pictures in your head. This is not inner speech. You may have like sensations, emotions. Pure emotions are not inner speech. But if you start talking to yourself about them, then it becomes inner speech. So that's
that
the
Yeah, so it's that level of when a person is conscious in recognizing that that voice is happening within the mind. It's kind of like a record player compared to something that's more unconscious happening.
Well, inner speech can be both. You can be talking to yourself and not quite knowing about it, and doing it in a like automatic fashion. And indeed, one form of inner speech which is detrimental is self-rumination. So people talk to themselves repeatedly. They cannot control the speech, and it's negative. It's self-critical, and most of the time they don't know that they're doing it. And then if you look at self-reflection, which is the more positive side of what we call self-awareness, then usually the speech for self is fully conscious. You do it and you know that you're doing it, and you're doing it in a constructive fashion to learn more about yourself and plan and remember and so forth.
So from your understanding, when it comes to self-rumination, is there any kind of techniques that people could do if they find themselves in that negative self-talk?
First of all, I'm going to state the obvious, which is that if we had the cure for self-rumination, we would know about it, and the person who would have come up with the cure would be a billionaire. Okay, so there's no easy fix. But increasingly, there's a researcher whose name is Cross, Ethan Cross, who's using inner speech that we self-ruminate with, but he tells us how to change it, and the way to change it is to engage in what he calls self-distancing. So you talk to yourself like you use the name Angelica. Yeah. And you, by doing so, it's as if you're talking to yourself, as if you are somebody else. And by putting a distance between your experiences and yourself, you are not immersed. When you are immersed, you lose objectivity. You just experience negative emotions without being able to control and deal with them. If you distance and you look at the big picture, and you are part of the big picture with inner speech that uses you as opposed to I, or uses Alain as opposed to me, you create a distance which reduces, it doesn't eliminate, but reduces self-rumination.
That's interesting, because it almost seems like there's this way of, like you're saying, like a person has to pull themselves back from identifying in that moment that it's, their fault if it's self-rumination, or that they're so immersed that they tend to get caught up in the emotional effect maybe of it.
Yeah, so it's interesting to realize that when you are happy and you are in the flow, it's good to be self-immersed. You don't want to break the magic of the moment by self-distancing. So when things are going well, you don't want to self-distancing, you want to self-immerse.
Okay.
And this is the experience where you realize that you've been working on musical composition or something, and it's been 2 hours and you didn't see the time pass, and you were fully immersed. This is positive. But when you are self-ruminating, the self-immersion part is not good. You need to break it into self-distancing to look at your problems, which are the source of the self-rumination, in a more detached, objective fashion.
So perhaps it's that level of having mindfulness in one's thoughts and actions to be able to catch through self-awareness, I'm self-ruminating, this is the time to actually practice self-distancing.
Yeah,
right?
the notion, you're mentioning mindfulness and meditation and that kind of stuff. By definition, mindfulness is self-immersed. It is in the present. It excludes thinking about your past, about your future, because it's most likely to become self-critical. Right. You are self-accepting in the present. You are not self-evaluating. You are just looking at what's going on.
Right.
in the present. So you are totally immersed, and actually, most likely in that state, you do not talk to yourself. The state of mindfulness inhibits inner speech, and thus inhibits the likelihood that you are going to engage in self-rumination. So mindfulness in the present also, at least temporarily, is going to reduce self-rumination.
And I remember reading one of those papers that you wrote about the benefits of mindfulness, but then also on the flip side of that, if a person is too present in the moment, there's no potential of future planning. So then that's also not a good thing.
Yeah, so it's a balance. It's like everything else in life. Am I going to not have wine at all? Am I going to have just a glass, or two, or am I going to drink the entire bottle? Yeah. So it makes sense that you need to be in the present, but you also at times you need to look at the past self-critically. You have to think about the future, even with some anxiety, to plan. The problem is when you overdo it in the future, right, in the past, or if you are over mindful, yes, then it's not good either. It's a balance. You have to have all sorts of different dimensions thrown into the mix.
Right, because then with those emotions, whether it's past thought, can lead closer toward depression, right, and then future thought is more toward anxiety. So then, but then those emotions are also necessary in case we need to be aware of change.
We need to experience maybe not depression, but maybe sadness or regret. And we need to experience some anxiety about the future so that it motivates us to move on and to do things and fix things. So if you experience these negative emotions in small doses, and short term, then they motivate you to improve. There's no self-improvement without some motivation to change. And what allows you to, or what motivates you in that sense, is these emotions that are bothersome. Yeah. That you say to yourself, I need to do something about it, right, past or future. And then if you want a break, then you engage in mindfulness. But if you just do mindfulness, then your problems that may be in the past or in the or future are not going to disappear on their own, obviously.
That's interesting. That's so intriguing. So there's kind of that balance also between the self and then the social world around us that gives us sometimes those cues, right? Of just whether it's, learning how to build our self-esteem, our self-awareness in the community, of being able to kind of navigate through times of uncertainty or through times of discovery.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the self is a social construct. If we were raised in isolation without people's feedback, and without the possibility for comparison with others, these are the two main mechanisms that are known to lead to knowledge about yourself. So if we were to be raised in isolation, we would not develop self-esteem, self-knowledge. We would not be able to think about the past, the future. We need people to define who we are and what we want to become. I'm not sure this is what you were referring to, but it's important to keep that in mind, is that we are self-reflecting, we're self-ruminating, self, but the self cannot exist without other selves, community of selves that that is used to anchor who you are and what you want to become, and also what you don't want to become.
Mm-hmm. So what are some of the most interesting things that you found through your research, whether it was when you first started or where you are now, about the topic of inner speech or self?
Yeah. A couple of things that stand out. For example, just by asking participants, and we've been testing about like over 1,000 of mostly university students, asking them try to be as objective as possible and list what you talk to yourself about, what for, and during what activities. The number one topic that comes up is negative emotions. So I was surprised and a bit disconcerted to realize that for university students, very often when they talk to themselves, it's to deal with their negative emotions, which, by the way, is called emotional self-regulation in the literature. And so you would expect that what would come up at the top would be more philosophical or more meaningful things. But then what comes next is what to eat. Remember that I have homework to do, that kind of stuff. Okay. So it's a bit surprising, but then if you really think about it, it makes sense that university students are going to talk to themselves about things that matter to them, that are pertinent, that are immediate in their lives. So you would think that they think about sex. Yeah. No, this is really totally at the bottom of the list, for example.
So with other research potentially that has been done in the area, like you're saying, depending on their developmental stage in life, that inner self-speech changes.
This is unknown. What we've been studying using the technique, it's called an open format listing self-report technique, has been done with university students. But what about older people? Actually, there's a researcher in the US. Her last name is Fama. I just don't remember her first name, who has been using a similar technique with older individuals, that is 40 years older. And she's finding different things. Older people don't talk to themselves about negative emotions as much as university students. But I'm not quite sure what she found yet, because it's preliminary. But what about depressed people? Right. What about in anxious people, in schizophrenia? And what I'm working on too is cultural differences. Depending the culture that you're in, Mexican or Polish or Japanese, is the inner speech, is it going to be the same? Are we going to end up observing the same basic frequencies or drastic differences? This is unknown. It's ongoing, but we don't have the data yet. So perhaps to go back to your question, something that I got really surprised by is our lack of knowledge of several facets of inner speech. This is pretty remarkable given the importance of this mental activity. Up to what point there are many, many unknowns.
And is that including unknowns for with personalities, like?
No, we
let's
do.
say the big five.
We do have more. We have emerging information about like personality traits and how they relate to inner speech. And of course, by personality, we are mostly referring to the big five, OCEAN, so openness to experience. You should know that, right? Yeah. C, conscientiousness, and so forth. So we have 5 basic traits that are universal. And so going back to self-rumination and self-reflection, people who are self-ruminating tend to score high on N. N is neuroticism, and basically it means anxiety, right? Which makes sense. Whereas those who are more on the self-reflection side of things, they are more at ease with themselves, they are less anxious, they score low on N, but they score higher on O, which is openness to experiences. Openness to who am I, what kind of person am I, like a healthy curiosity about who you are, which is effectively openness to experience, the self being one experience.
So this is a little bit random, but it just kind of popped into my head. Um, since the environments have an effect on inner speech, and then cultural also and geographical locations, just out of your hypothesis of what you know and your knowledge, how do you think, kids are developing in today's time with so much different types of factors, whether it's like social media or...
Well, yeah, precisely. You've got social media. I mean, when I was growing up, we had, of course, no computers, no... I'm old, by the way. And we had black and white pictures that you would take, and then you had to go and develop them. Today, kids their pictures are constantly being taken. They are filmed with cell phones. And we know that this is called a self-focusing stimulus. When I take a picture of you or when I film you, you may be not fully aware of it, but you become the object of your own attention. You become in a state of self-awareness. And if you are happy with yourself, you're going to self-reflect. If you are unhappy with yourself, you're going to self-ruminate. So one could submit the hypothesis that nowadays kids being exposed to much more self-focusing stimuli than 30, 40, 50 years ago are more likely to self-ruminate or self-reflect. And then if you look at social media, Facebook, Twitter, and so forth, when you enter these forums, you are comparing yourself to others. Often what people present of themselves is an enhanced version of themselves, so that you are artificially bumping up or increasing the criteria of looks, for instance, or of achievement, and so forth. And so it makes it more difficult for you to, when you compare yourself to these unrealistic criteria, you are more likely to see your self-esteem go down, and then self-ruminate and self-criticize and so forth.
That's interesting, because I know, like, anytime I go through my own type of self-reflection techniques, similar to you, like, I would be going for walks, I would be bird watching, and I mean, the amount of times that I've gone for walks in today's date, sometimes I look around and I'm like, where's all the kids? Like, there's nobody on the playground, and everybody's like this. And I'm like, well, where do they get their time to self-reflect and their time to self-regulate?
And just to be in the present moment and not thinking about the picture that was taken of me 2 hours ago, or what is it that these people are going to think of my post on Facebook, because there's social comparison, but there's also social feedback with likes, or you post something and it's ignored completely by other people. You feel bad about that, right? Or people react negatively to something that you posted. So the environment nowadays for not just kids, but young adults, anybody for that matter, is much more conducive to self-evaluation, self-criticism, self-enhancement, and so forth. So it really, I think, is important, and I'm not the only one saying that you need to limit the amount of time that you spend on these social media platforms. And just as you said, go out, talk to the birds, or look at the birds or the bunnies or whatever. Just experience things that surround, as opposed to a screen and an alternate reality that is distorted because people don't want to present themselves the way they really are. They want to look even better, and so forth. Yeah.
So with just a couple of minutes to spare,
Yep.
is there anything that you'd like to leave the viewers either thinking about or something that you're kind of continuing your curiosity and your journey and exploration in your research?
I would like to mention that an important part of my work is I'm an editor for scientific journals, 3 in particular, and it's important work because the journal receives lots of submissions for publications from researchers, and you need to have somebody who's going to look at the manuscripts, is going to evaluate them, and is going to make sure that the quality of the work meets basic scientific standards, so that then the piece is sent to reviewers, experts, and then they provide the editor with feedback, and then the editor makes a editorial decision to accept, reject. Usually it's accept with lots of modifications, but I want to mention that work of mine because it's like being a gatekeeper for the scientific quality of work being published. And basically all that we've been talking about today, not maybe all, but lots of it is based on published work that you hope meets basic standards. Yeah. And that's the role of the editor for scientific publishing.
And it's a very important role because, to your point, that's how we're able to push knowledge and be able to evolve the subject matter.
Yeah, and importantly, it filters work that is of a lesser quality or is biased, that doesn't deserve to be published.
Well, Dr. Morin, I really appreciate you
it's
doing
my pleasure.
this and sharing your knowledge and expertise.
My pleasure.
And yeah, we'll end it at that.
Thank you very much for having me.